Nobody saved me a seat. That was the moment I realized I had become a stranger in the family I spent 30 years building. I stood in the doorway of the banquet hall holding a small gift bag and looking across a room filled with people I loved. Laughter bounced off the walls. Conversations overlapped. Music played softly in the background. Everyone seemed happy to be there. Everyone except me. My name is Patricia Morgan. I am 69 years old, and for 3 decades I organized birthdays, holidays, graduations, anniversaries, and every family gathering you can imagine. When someone was sick, I showed up with food. When someone needed help moving, I was there before sunrise. When my husband Edward was alive, we made family our priority. We believed that if you invested enough love into the people around you, that love would eventually come back to you. At least that was what I believed. The event that evening was supposed to be a simple family celebration. My granddaughter Emma had just been accepted into college, and everyone gathered at a local restaurant to celebrate. I arrived 10 minutes early, thinking I might help set things up. Old habits are hard to break. Through the large windows, I could already see my son Brian laughing with relatives near the back of the room. Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, stood at the center of a group conversation, greeting people as they arrived. She looked comfortable, confident, like she belonged exactly where she was. I walked inside with a smile on my face and looked around for my seat. Every chair at the long table had a place card. Emma, Brian, Jennifer, cousins, friends, even neighbors. I scanned the entire table twice. My name was nowhere to be found. At first I assumed it was a mistake. Someone must have forgotten. These things happen. I set my gift bag down and waited. Surely someone would notice. Surely someone would say, "Patricia, we saved a spot for you right here." But nobody did. People greeted me politely. They smiled. They hugged me. Then they returned to their conversations. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Eventually, I found an empty chair pushed against the wall near the back of the room and sat down by myself. From there, I watched the celebration unfold. Toasts were given. Stories were shared. Photographs were taken. Nobody asked why I was sitting alone. Nobody seemed to realize anything was wrong. The strangest part was that nobody was being cruel. That would have been easier to understand. There were no harsh words. No arguments. No dramatic confrontation. Just something far more painful. Indifference. As I sat there, I found myself studying the family photographs displayed on a nearby table. Picture after picture showed moments from the last several years. Vacations, holidays, birthdays. In many of them, I was missing, not intentionally cropped out, simply absent. I stared at those images longer than I should have. Then a thought crossed my mind that I could not shake. Maybe this did not begin tonight. Maybe I had been disappearing for years and only now noticed it. Across the room, Emma waved at me and smiled warmly. I smiled back. Then I looked around at the family I loved more than anything and realized something that left a hollow feeling in my chest. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being part of the picture. That night, I drove home with the gift bag still sitting unopened on the passenger seat beside me. Emma had thanked me for coming. She hugged me before I left and told me she loved me. The warmth in her voice was genuine, which somehow made everything else hurt more. The problem was not Emma. The problem was the growing realization that I no longer knew where I fit in my own family. When I arrived home, the house felt unusually quiet. Edward had been gone for 6 years, yet there were still moments when I expected to hear his footsteps in the hallway or the sound of his evening news program drifting from the living room. I placed my purse on the kitchen counter and stood there for a while looking around the room. Every corner of that house carried memories. Birthday cakes baked at midnight. School projects spread across the dining table. Holiday dinners that took 2 days to prepare. For 30 years, family had been the center of my life. I never regretted that. Not once. Yet standing there alone, I found myself wondering whether anyone remembered how much work it took to hold everything together. The next morning, I opened an old photo album while drinking coffee. It was one of dozens stored in a cabinet near the living room. Edward used to joke that I documented family life better than a professional historian. As I turned the pages, memories flooded back. There was Brian at 8 years old holding a fishing trophy after a weekend trip his father planned. There was our first family Thanksgiving in the house we spent years paying off. There was Emma as a toddler sitting on my lap during Christmas morning. Looking at those photographs made me smile. Then something else caught my attention. In almost every picture, I was behind the camera. I was setting the table, serving food, wrapping gifts, organizing activities, making things happen. The family memories everyone treasured existed because someone worked quietly in the background to create them. I had never thought about it before. At the time, I was simply doing what needed to be done. Around lunchtime, I received a group text from the family. Several relatives were discussing plans for an upcoming summer gathering. Messages moved quickly across the screen. Locations were suggested. Menus were discussed. Guest lists were finalized. I read every message carefully. Nobody asked for my input. Nobody wondered whether I wanted to help. Nobody even acknowledged that for nearly 3 decades I had planned almost every major family event. Again, nobody was being intentionally cruel. They simply no longer saw me in that role. The realization stayed with me all afternoon. As evening approached, I walked through the house carrying the photo album. Eventually, I stopped in front of a framed family portrait hanging in the hallway. It had been taken 10 years earlier. Everyone was there. Edward, Brian, Jennifer, Emma, me. Looking at the picture now, I remembered exactly how difficult it was to coordinate schedules, book the photographer, choose the location, and get everyone together on the same day. I remembered every detail because I had organized all of it. Suddenly, a question entered my mind that I could not shake. When did they stop seeing me as the person who held the family together? The answer did not come immediately, but as I stood there staring at that photograph, another memory surfaced. A small moment from years earlier that seemed insignificant at the time. Looking back, I realized it might have been the beginning of everything. The memory stayed with me for the rest of the week. At first, it seemed too small to matter. One of those ordinary family moments that disappear beneath larger events. Yet the more I thought about it, the more important it became. It happened about 8 years earlier, not long after Jennifer began taking a larger role in organizing family gatherings. At the time, I welcomed the help. After all, I was getting older. Brian and Jennifer were building their own traditions. It felt natural for responsibilities to shift. The event was a 4th of July barbecue at Brian's house. For nearly 20 years, I had hosted every major holiday celebration. I planned the menus, coordinated schedules, decorated tables, bought supplies, made sure every relative felt included. That year, Jennifer volunteered to take over. I remember arriving early, carrying 2 homemade pies and a container of potato salad. I expected to help set up, just as I always had. Instead, Jennifer greeted me at the door with a smile and said everything was already handled. At first, I felt relieved. Then I noticed something strange. Throughout the afternoon, people complimented the event. The decorations, the food, the activities for the children. Every time someone praised Jennifer, she smiled graciously. There was nothing wrong with that. She deserved credit for her work. Yet several relatives began telling stories about how Jennifer had transformed family gatherings. According to them, she was the reason everyone stayed connected. She was the one keeping traditions alive. I remember standing beside the drink table listening to those conversations. No one mentioned the years before. No one mentioned the countless holidays Edward and I organized when our children were growing up. Again, nobody was being intentionally hurtful. They simply focused on what was directly in front of them. I told myself not to be sensitive. Families evolve. New people step into leadership roles. That is normal. Looking back, however, I realized something important. That afternoon was the first time I felt invisible. Not excluded. Not disliked. Invisible. Over the years that followed, similar moments accumulated. Family group photographs were posted online before anyone remembered to send me copies. Travel plans were discussed without including me. Holiday menus were finalized before I even knew there was a conversation. None of the incidents were dramatic enough to create conflict. Together, though, they painted a picture I could no longer ignore. I had spent years assuming my place within the family was permanent. The truth was more complicated. One evening, while sorting through another stack of photographs, I discovered an album from Emma's childhood. I sat at the dining room table turning pages slowly. Birthday parties, school recitals, family vacations. In almost every photograph, I was busy doing something. Carrying gifts, setting tables, helping children, serving food. I rarely appeared in the center of the picture, yet I was everywhere. The realization stopped me cold. Perhaps that was the problem. For decades, I worked behind the scenes making family life possible. The better I did my job, the less visible it became. People remembered the celebration. They forgot the person who created it. Late that night, I closed the album and stared at the dark window above the kitchen sink. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. If I disappeared from every family gathering tomorrow, how long would it take anyone to notice? The answer frightened me more than I wanted to admit. The question stayed with me for days. If I disappeared from every family gathering tomorrow, how long would it take anyone to notice? I hated that I had asked it. Even more, I hated that I could not answer it with confidence. The following weekend gave me another reason to wonder. Jennifer organized a family brunch at a popular restaurant downtown. I found out about it by accident. Emma mentioned it during a phone call while telling me about a school project. She assumed I already knew. For a moment, I almost pretended that I did. Instead, I asked a simple question. What brunch? There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then Emma explained that several relatives were getting together on Sunday. She sounded confused that I had not heard about it. After we hung up, I stared at my phone for a long time. Nobody had intentionally hidden the event from me. At least I did not think so. More likely, nobody remembered to invite me. Somehow that possibility hurt even more. Sunday morning arrived. I debated whether to go. Part of me wanted to stay home. Another part needed to see what was happening with my own eyes. When I arrived at the restaurant, nearly everyone was already there. The long table near the windows was filled with relatives, friends, and neighbors. Laughter drifted across the room. Coffee cups clinked against saucers. It looked warm, comfortable, familiar. Yet the moment I approached the table, I noticed something. There was no place setting for me. Once again, nobody seemed surprised to see me. Several people greeted me warmly. Brian stood and gave me a hug. Jennifer smiled and asked how I had been. Then everyone returned to their conversations. Eventually, a server pulled over an extra chair from another table. I sat at the far end beside a decorative plant. Throughout brunch, stories flowed easily. Vacation plans, upcoming birthdays, holiday ideas. Several family events were discussed in detail. I listened carefully. More than once, decisions were mentioned that had already been made. Dates selected. Locations reserved. Plans finalized. Nobody asked my opinion. Nobody seemed to realize that for decades I would have been helping organize every one of those gatherings. I stirred my coffee and watched the conversation move around me like water flowing around a stone. The strange thing was that nobody was excluding me on purpose. Brian occasionally smiled in my direction. Jennifer asked whether I wanted more coffee. Everyone remained polite. Yet I felt more distant than ever. Later that afternoon, I opened social media and saw photographs from the brunch already being posted online. Group pictures, smiling faces, shared memories. I clicked through them slowly. In most of the photographs, I was missing entirely. In one picture, only part of my shoulder appeared at the edge of the frame. I laughed softly when I saw it. Not because it was funny, because it felt symbolic. For years, I had been fading to the edge of the picture without realizing it. That evening, I sat alone on the back porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees. As the sky darkened, another memory surfaced. Not a painful one, a revealing one. I suddenly remembered the exact moment Jennifer became the center of family life. And for the first time, I began to understand how I slowly became invisible without anyone ever meaning for it to happen. The memory arrived so clearly that it felt like I was living it again. I was sitting on my back porch watching the sunset when I finally remembered the moment everything changed. It happened 12 years earlier, shortly after Emma was born. At the time, Jennifer was overwhelmed. She was a new mother trying to balance work, family, and the endless responsibilities that come with raising a child. Naturally, I stepped in to help. I babysat whenever she needed me. I brought meals to their house several times a week. I folded laundry, ran errands, and spent countless hours helping wherever I could. I never kept score. That is what family does. Looking back, however, I realized that period marked the beginning of a shift I did not fully understand. As Emma grew older, Jennifer gradually became the person everyone called first. She organized birthdays, scheduled family events, created group messages, shared photographs, coordinated vacations. At first, I was grateful. After years of carrying those responsibilities, it felt nice to step back. The problem was not that Jennifer took over. The problem was that nobody noticed when I disappeared. The transition happened so smoothly that there was never a conversation about it. No acknowledgement. No appreciation. One day I was the person holding everything together. The next day, I was simply someone who showed up. For years, I convinced myself that none of it mattered. Families evolve. Children become adults. New traditions emerge. Yet every once in a while, something would happen that left a small bruise on my heart. A family vacation planned without mentioning it to me until reservations were already made. A holiday dinner where every decision had been finalized before I received a phone call. A birthday party where I learned details from social media rather than family members. None of those moments seemed important enough to complain about. Together, however, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. A few days after the brunch, I received another reminder. Emma called to ask whether I still had copies of old family photographs she needed for a school project. Of course I did. My attic contained decades of albums, scrapbooks, and framed pictures. The next afternoon, she stopped by after class. We spent nearly 2 hours sorting through boxes of memories. Emma laughed at old hairstyles. She pointed at photographs of Brian as a child and teased him mercilessly. The afternoon felt wonderful. For the first time in weeks, I forgot about feeling invisible. Then something happened that caught me completely off guard. Emma picked up a photograph from a Thanksgiving dinner nearly 20 years earlier. The dining room table stretched from one end of the room to the other. Relatives filled every seat. Decorations covered every surface. It was one of the largest gatherings I had ever organized. Emma studied the picture carefully. Then she looked at me. "Grandma, who planned all of these holidays?" I smiled. "Your grandfather and I did." She blinked. Really? The question was innocent. She was not trying to hurt me. Yet hearing it felt like someone quietly opening a door I did not know existed. Emma genuinely did not know. She had grown up enjoying traditions that seemed to appear automatically. She never saw the years of planning behind them. She never saw the work. As she continued flipping through photographs, I realized something painful. Maybe she was not the only one who had forgotten. Maybe the entire family had slowly stopped seeing the person behind the traditions. And for the first time, I began to wonder whether anyone besides me still remembered what those 30 years of sacrifice actually looked like. Emma's question stayed with me long after she left that afternoon. Who planned all of these holidays? The fact that she had to ask revealed something I had been struggling to understand for weeks. The people I loved most were not intentionally erasing me. They simply never saw the work that happened behind the scenes. When traditions succeed year after year, people stop asking who keeps them alive. They simply expect them to appear. That evening, I found myself walking through the house room by room. Every space carried evidence of a life spent taking care of others. The dining room where I hosted countless family dinners. The kitchen where I baked birthday cakes and holiday pies. The guest room where relatives stayed during difficult seasons in their lives. Looking around, I realized how much of my identity had become connected to being needed. For decades, someone always needed something. Advice, help, childcare, a place to stay, a shoulder to lean on. I gave it freely because that was who I was. The problem came when nobody needed those things anymore. A few days later, Brian stopped by unexpectedly. He had been in the neighborhood and decided to visit. We sat together in the kitchen drinking coffee. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. Work, weather, home repairs. Then I mentioned Emma's school project and the old photographs we had been sorting through. Brian smiled. Emma loved looking at those pictures. I nodded. She was surprised to learn how many family events your father and I organized. Brian laughed softly. You always loved doing that stuff. The comment was harmless. Yet something about it caught my attention. Loved doing that stuff. 30 years of family traditions reduced to a simple hobby. I looked at my son and suddenly understood something important. Brian did not remember those years the same way I did. He remembered showing up. I remembered creating the experience he showed up to. Neither perspective was wrong. They were simply different. As our conversation continued, I began asking small questions. Did he remember the family reunions? The holiday dinners? The graduation parties? Of course he did. He smiled at the memories. Yet whenever I asked who organized them, he hesitated. Sometimes he guessed. Sometimes he shrugged. Occasionally he got it right. Most of the time, however, the details were gone. Watching him search for answers made me realize he was not trying to dismiss my contributions. He genuinely had not thought about them in years. That realization changed something inside me. For weeks, I had been carrying hurt and resentment. Now I felt something else. Sadness. Not because Brian failed to appreciate me. Because he never fully understood what those years required in the first place. After he left, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at a framed photograph from Emma's 5th birthday party. I remembered every detail of that day. The decorations, the games, the food, the sleepless nights preparing everything. Brian remembered showing up and watching Emma blow out candles. Both memories were true, yet only one included the work behind the moment. Late that night, I found myself looking through another album. This one contained photographs from nearly every family gathering over 3 decades. As I turned the pages, a realization slowly emerged. Maybe the problem was not that my family forgot me. Maybe they never truly saw me in the first place. And for the first time, I began wondering whether anyone else had noticed what I was only now starting to understand. The answer arrived sooner than I expected. 2 weeks after Emma helped me sort through old photographs, she stopped by again carrying a notebook and several printed pages from her school project. We sat together at the dining room table, surrounded by albums and memories. At first, we talked about ordinary things. Classes, friends, future plans. Then she opened her notebook and pointed to a list of names. I interviewed family members for my project, she said. I wanted to learn more about our traditions. I smiled and asked what she discovered. Emma hesitated before answering. Something strange. That single phrase immediately caught my attention. She explained that she had asked relatives who usually organized holidays, reunions, and family celebrations over the years. The answers were surprisingly inconsistent. Some people said Jennifer. Others mentioned Brian. A few could not remember at all. Emma looked down at her notes and shook her head. Almost nobody mentioned you. The words landed softly, but they hurt all the same. Not because I needed recognition, because they confirmed what I had been feeling for months. Entire chapters of family history were slowly disappearing. Emma seemed frustrated by it. That does not make sense, she said. Every photograph we looked at showed you doing everything. I laughed quietly. Photographs only capture moments. She looked directly at me. No, Grandma. They capture patterns too. Her response surprised me. For a moment, I saw something familiar in her expression. The same determination Edward used to have whenever he believed something was unfair. Emma spent the next half hour flipping through albums. She pointed out details I had stopped noticing years ago. In one picture, I was carrying trays of food while everyone else relaxed. In another, I was decorating tables before guests arrived. In another, I was helping children with activities while adults socialized nearby. The pattern was impossible to miss once someone pointed it out. Then Emma asked a question that left me speechless. Grandma, did anybody ever thank you? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I did not know what to say. Of course people thank me occasionally. Yet that was not what she meant. She was asking whether anyone truly understood the scale of what I had given. The honest answer was probably not. Emma closed the album and sat quietly for a moment. Then she said something I will never forget. I think everyone got used to you always being there. The simplicity of her observation took my breath away. That was exactly what happened. The more dependable I became, the less visible I appeared. Reliability had turned into invisibility. Later that evening, after Emma left, I found myself thinking about her words. For years, I believed my sadness came from being forgotten. Now I understood something deeper. My family had never intentionally pushed me away. They simply stopped noticing the foundation beneath their lives because it had always been there. As I sat alone in the quiet house, my phone buzzed with a new family group message. Plans were being finalized for another gathering the following weekend. Dozens of messages appeared within minutes. Locations, menus, seating arrangements. Then something unusual happened. Before anyone else replied, Emma sent a single question into the group chat. Who organized all these family gatherings before Mom? The conversation stopped instantly. For nearly 3 minutes, nobody responded to Emma's question. I watched the family group chat on my phone as message after message failed to appear. Normally, conversations moved quickly. Someone always had an opinion. Someone always had a joke. Yet now there was only silence. The question itself was simple. Who organized all these family gatherings before Mom? No accusations. No drama. Just a question. Eventually, one of my cousins replied. Patricia and Edward used to do most of them, I think. Another relative added. I remember Patricia planning Thanksgiving every year. Then someone else mentioned the family reunions. Another remembered the graduation parties. Slowly, memories began resurfacing. One by one, people started recalling events they had not thought about in years. As I read the messages, I felt something strange. Not satisfaction, Not vindication. Something closer to recognition. For the first time in a very long while, people were remembering. The following weekend, the family gathering took place at Brian and Jennifer's house. I considered staying home. Part of me wanted to avoid the entire situation. Yet another part knew I needed to be there. Not for anyone else. For myself. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt slightly different. Nothing dramatic. Just different. Relatives greeted me warmly. Several people brought up memories that had appeared in the group chat throughout the week. One cousin laughed while recalling a family reunion I organized nearly 20 years earlier. Another mentioned a Christmas dinner that became legendary because the power went out halfway through the evening. For the first time in years, conversations included parts of family history that seemed forgotten. During dinner, Emma sat across from me. At one point, she glanced around the table and smiled. I could tell she was paying attention. So was I? The difference became obvious when someone started discussing future holiday plans. Normally, those conversations happened around me. This time, Brian turned and asked, "Mom, what do you think?" The question caught me completely off guard. It was such a small thing. Yet I could not remember the last time anyone asked for my opinion before making family plans. Throughout the evening, similar moments occurred. Nothing dramatic. No grand speeches. No emotional apologies. Just small acknowledgments. A relative thanked me for years of hosting. Another shared an old photograph from a family event I had forgotten. Each moment felt insignificant on its own. Together, they meant everything. Later that night, after most guests had gone home, Emma found me standing alone on the back patio. The summer air was warm. Laughter drifted from inside the house. She stepped beside me and leaned against the railing. "Did you notice?" she asked. I smiled. "Notice what?" Emma looked toward the house. "People remember now." I followed her gaze. Through the windows, I could see family members talking and laughing together. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I realized something important. The goal had never been recognition. The goal had never been gratitude. What hurt most was feeling invisible. Feeling as though my place in the family no longer existed. Tonight, for the first time in years, that feeling was gone. And as I stood there beside my granddaughter watching the people I loved gather together inside, I understood that one simple question had changed far more than anyone realized. The weeks that followed felt different in ways that were difficult to explain. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody suddenly transformed into a different person. There were no emotional speeches or grand declarations. Instead, small things began to change. The kind of things most people would never notice unless they had spent years feeling invisible. A few days after the family gathering, Brian called and asked whether I wanted to help plan Thanksgiving dinner. The question surprised me so much that I nearly laughed. For years, I would have assumed I was helping. Then there was Christmas. Jennifer called one afternoon and asked if I still had the recipe for Edward's favorite pecan pie. She could have searched online. She could have used any recipe she wanted. Instead, she asked for mine. Again, it seemed like a tiny thing. Yet those tiny things carried meaning. More importantly, something changed inside me. For months, I believed the solution to my sadness would come from other people finally appreciating me. I thought recognition would fix everything. The truth turned out to be more complicated. What I really needed was to remember my own value whether anyone acknowledged it or not. One rainy afternoon, I sat in the living room sorting through old photographs. The same albums that once made me feel forgotten now felt different. I no longer looked at them searching for proof that I mattered. I already knew I did. Every photograph represented a life spent loving people. Every holiday, every reunion, every birthday party existed because someone cared enough to create it. That someone happened to be me. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud of that. A few weeks later, Emma stopped by after school. We sat together on the back porch drinking lemonade while watching the sun sink behind the trees. At one point, she looked at me and smiled. "You seem happier lately." I thought about her observation before answering. She was right. I was happier. Not because everyone suddenly remembered everything I had done. Not because the past had changed. I was happier because I stopped measuring my worth by how visible I was to other people. Emma listened quietly as I explained it. Then she nodded. "Grandpa used to say something like that." Hearing Edward mentioned brought a smile to my face. He would have understood all of this long before I did. He always had a way of seeing things clearly. Before leaving, Emma hugged me tightly. As she walked toward her car, she turned back and said something I will never forget. "You are not a stranger, Grandma." You are the reason we are a family." I stood there. For a moment after she drove away, the words echoed softly in my mind. Not because they erased the hurt of the past, because they reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. The value of a life cannot be measured by how often people say thank you. Some contributions become so woven into the fabric of a family that they are mistaken for something that has always existed. Years from now, people may forget who planned a specific holiday or organized a particular gathering. That is simply how memory works. But love leaves traces that last much longer than memory. As evening settled over the yard, I sat quietly and thought about the family I had spent 30 years caring for. They were imperfect. So was I. Yet despite everything, we were still connected. And for the first time in a very long while, I no longer felt like a stranger. I felt exactly where I belonged.